Good afternoon, all of you, and thank you, Swati, for the rather elaborate and liberal introduction. Coming to JNU is always a pleasure. I've been a student here, guest faculty, and I've rubbed shoulders with people from many schools for many reasons, participated in student activism, even engaged with JNUTA on more than one occasion, including in my role at one point as the president of the IPU Teachers Association. We've shared many trials and tribulations. The last time I came to give a talk like this in JNUTA was when the series on democracy were being done, and I had my talk in the School of Computer Sciences. There I was just trying to address this common notion that people have, especially outside the sciences, that scientists only work for themselves and they do nothing for the country. And in fact, even policymakers, many of our own science managers, ministers, they consider that science is just, in fact, now of course it's also increasingly fashionable to call Indian science as all westernized science, Christian science, whatever science. To give a religious label is very easy to dismiss anything that you try to do. You also heard that recently all the major 300 plus awards being given by various governmental, even non-governmental bodies, trusts, and associations, societies have been scrapped unilaterally by the government of India. And we are supposed to wait for the next Vigyan Ratna award or whatever award, which we don't know what it is about, and how it is going to be a replacement to all these other smaller, pats that people get on their back when they do in various fields of science across the whole country, with all the challenges of unity and diversity that we have. So at that point, my focus was to say that it is possible, and there are people in Indian science who are looking at their own science in the larger picture of the country and the society and India's place in the world in that field. Since then, a lot has happened, and I've tried to update it to the best extent possible. I'll take you through this journey. But because this is a teachers association, and that's the best qualification that I have to come here, that I was also involved in a teachers association. And it also has implications for what we as associations do collectively for our own profession in higher education or research or as a university or an institute, and how we collectively remain relevant through while having one foot in our own field. Can we put the other foot in a more collective effort in a manner that it makes better sense to all the stakeholders, including the people or the government? It's possible, and I'll demonstrate in a short while that at least in our field it has been possible. Also, I want to use this occasion to tell how many problems of our society, of our country, of even the globe, cut across many disciplines. And even if we think we have some solutions from our own discipline towards that global problem, unless all these different solutions are packed together into a meaningful package of a policy package or a decision package or an implementation package, a monitoring package, international relations package, whichever way you want to look at it from your own disciplinary angle, unless it is all stitched together into a meaningful package, it will not actually reach the people of the purpose for which it is meant. And that's an important role that higher educational and research institutions have to play, more so in institutions like JNU, which have been right from the beginning set up for interdisciplinarity, social consciousness, and global consciousness. Unlike most other universities at the time, and still JNU continues to be a leader in that sense. Also, unfortunately, JNU has been challenged in the recent times for its alleged anti-national role and alleged pursuit of its own ideological trajectories in complete disregard to the national priorities as defined by the national government of the day. These are challenges, they come, they go. In a circus, ringmasters may change, buffoons may change, but real circus have to be done by us. Governments come and go. We run the universities. We do the research. We bring this teaching to the classroom. We bring the research to the people. And we have to live through these challenges, maybe negotiate our way through them, sometimes challenge them, sometimes get challenged by them. But as long as we remain rooted in our own commitment or discipline and to the cause of education and science, not only individually but also collectively, and that's where I appreciate JNUTA organizing a series like this. I have not known many associations in the country doing this, and that's a tragedy actually. In my own university, I tried through the IPU Teachers Association. We couldn't maintain a successful series over a long period of time. So in that sense, once again, thank you for thinking of this series and also thinking of me to come and speak to you today. And I know your time is very precious, but I'll try to make the best of my effort to make sense to all of you and convince you at the end of it that your time spent was well worth it. I hope so. So I'm sure most of you are already aware that there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. A list of,
It's not in the slideshow.
oh, okay. Sorry. It will come. It will take a little while. Yeah. We live in an interconnected world, whether we like it or not, and we also, after the Second World War, India was one of the founding member nations of the United Nations. And United Nations was, though originally meant to foster peace and prevent wars and foster international development, it also went on to do many other things along the way. It set up a World Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO. It set up World Health Organization and, of course, other financial agencies, etc. It also has UN Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO. And through the United Nations, this is particularly through the United Nations Environment Program, and now all the various UN bodies are again coming together to reconnect their own interdisciplinary linkages to create a umbrella body called UN-1. UN-1 is an emerging umbrella body that tries to address the interface of multiple UN agencies and brings common issues to the front, so that they also don't get reduced to like our university departments that don't talk to each other. Even the interdisciplinary corridors are a joke. When I was a student here, used to be that the corridors always have a door and the door always has a lock. So much for interdisciplinarity. But even at the UN level, this is being recognized and addressed. Now, one of the things, you must have heard of Millennium Development Goals. Countries have agreed to achieve certain things for the benefit of the whole world by 2000, which it did not. So since it could not achieve the Millennium Development Goals, it decided to shift the goalpost by another 30 years. So by 2030, the world is supposed to achieve the revisited and expanded, revised, enlarged edition of the Millennium Development Goals, now called as the Sustainable Development Goals. The one good thing that happened in the process is that in this revised, enlarged version, many of the social issues got prominently highlighted, and including poverty, hunger, health, education, gender, water, energy, employment, economic growth, industry, inequality, sustainability of cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and partnerships for all these goals. So they highlight in fact they made partnership as itself a goal for sustainable development at all levels, not only at the intergovernmental level but also within each country. You need center-state cooperation. We are in Delhi, so we understand what center, better than any other state, what center-state cooperation or the lack of it means in our daily lives, not just in the upper levels of politics. They affect us every day. Still, when you look at it on the face of it, we feel that, what does molecular biology to do with it? What does bioinformatics have to do with it? What does any particular field have to do with all of them? It depends on the way you try to connect, but if you do, you'll find, and as I'll demonstrate, you can actually connect to all, most if not all of them, through your own field. Maybe in the periphery of your field, but the whole definition of core periphery relationships of the way we are doing our science is now getting redefined, at least in the manner in which the global problems are challenging us. They are challenging us to come out of our confines of disciplinary boundaries, challenging us to connect to the common goals, common problems, and try to do whatever we can within our limitations to address them. Now, scientific and technological capacity, as I will also demonstrate to you in a short while, is necessary but not always sufficient to be able to achieve these sustainable development goals. We all know technology has impacted education, technology has impacted research, technology impacted communication, it impacted many things. It impacted transport, and yet there are many things which technology alone cannot deliver. And this is where social sciences perspectives, even humanities perspectives, international relations perspectives become very important. When you connect them with the role science technology plays in the governance, in the society, in international relations, you realize how important it is for people to connect with one another in order to be able to make better sense. I'll tell you one simple thing, maybe it will come back to later. India does not have a science attaché in any of its embassies anywhere in the world. We are hoping to become a developed economy very soon. We are hoping to become a Vishwaguru very soon. Our diplomats trained in foreign policy through their own training system have no way of receiving scientific inputs, or even for that matter, other kinds of social science inputs. For whatever role in diplomacy they have to play, sitting in United Nations, where issues are becoming increasingly technical, they are no longer simply diplomatic or administrative. Targets are becoming increasingly technical. Somebody says net zero. What does a foreign policy diplomat have to do with net zero? How does he understand it? How does he negotiate it? And yet this is what is happening. Our diplomats are having to negotiate with no training whatsoever in WHO, in FAO, in UNEP, in all kinds of bodies. It's a different matter. They don't care to ask us, I have to talk this, can you brief me? But it's also true that we don't care to tell them. So there is a disconnect both ways. And this disconnect has to be addressed, at least by us as a nation, and probably many others who have that capacity to be able to make that connection in places that matter, not only within domestic governance, but also in international negotiations. Also, one thing that happened, some of you would be aware, but for others who are not, the transition, if you're, okay, let me take you back a little bit. One of the biggest intergovernmental challenges, including for scientists to play a role in development, was addressed in the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, which is where some of the most interesting intergovernmental principles have been established, that polluter pays, long-term pollution is as important as what is happening today, historical emissions are as important as current emissions, per capita emissions are more important than national emissions, large country will have large emissions, large population will have large emissions. So many of these principles, which are now literally written in stone for intergovernmental cooperation, have been negotiated way back in 1992, Rio Declaration on Environment and Development in the Earth Summit in the United Nations Environment Program. At that point, even the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change had just beginning to come up. So the Convention on Climate Change was the first time that the United Nations had to seriously look at something as complex as climate change as an intergovernmental issue. So where is carbon coming from, where is it going, what can be done, what cannot be done, and who are negotiating it other than the IPCC, which is a scientific body advising the United Nations Framework Convention. The governments are actually represented only by diplomats, the foreign IFS guys. And for many years, India used some of those founding principles to say, we have the option of doing nothing. We are a sovereign country. Nobody tells us what to do, including United Nations. We are an independent country, a sovereign country. Of course, pollution may be a problem. We will look at it when we get there. Of course, we have other problems. Our poverty is a problem, our development is a problem, various other problems. We have our priorities. You are nobody to tell us what our priorities are. And we understand, we recognize, but we will address them when we have to. Many countries, including India, got away with this argument. They still try to get away with the same argument. And there is a problem there. Because when the world moved from Millennium Development Goals to Sustainable Development Goals, one big change that happened is that till the Millennium Development Goals, doing nothing was an option. You agreed a common goal, but what you do to achieve that common goal was a sovereign choice. If you decide to do nothing, your problem. You had no commitment, you had no target, you had no roadmap. So it was possible to agree to everything and do nothing. But now it is not. So that's a very, very important transition the world has made from allowing doing nothing as a sovereign option to independent nations to nationally determined commitments. What are you doing? Why did PM have to announce on the last day of the climate COP conference in Glasgow last year, or was it earlier this year perhaps, that we will also commit to net zero by 2070. It was a meaningless commitment because the world may not exist by 2070, we don't know. But because the world is only talking of 2030, 1.5 degree temperature threshold, already we have crossed 1 degree, only 0.5 degree warming is the margin we have in less than 8 years, and we are saying we will do it by 2070. But it was politically important, simply because when you as a country signed up to agreeing that sustainable development goals are important, you also signed up to agreeing that I don't have option of doing nothing. You also signed up to agreeing I have the duty to do something which is non-zero, and that duty is voluntary. So I make voluntary commitments, but that does not mean I will make a zero commitment. So you make a non-zero commitment. So everybody is saying 2030, 2040, our PM says 2070, it's a non-zero commitment. So it's a very clever way of doing things. But even then, the point I'm making is, we could not say it's our country, it's our problem, you are nobody, go to hell. So that choice is no longer available. And for such wide set of problems as we have looked at, they cover virtually everything that all of us talk about all the time, right? So governance towards us, so that means you have to do something, and you have to set targets, you have to set in every sector, you have to set how to achieve them, how much per year, how much per decade, and then that means you have to know how to set those targets. They're not purely political targets. They also have to be achievable targets. So you have to know what is possible in coal or energy, what is possible in agriculture, what is possible in some other field, or education or gender. So even a government that has to make these commitments requires input to make policies, to make targets, to define the pathway to meeting those targets, and to actually show even monitoring whether it is happening according to target or not, and then going and delivering that target in the United Nations and saying, yes, we have done this. All this will not happen automatically for an IAS bureaucrat or IFS sitting in a embassy abroad or even in the government of India in some ministry. They will need some justification, some rationale, if not some scientific data to back their policies, and which means they will increasingly have to look for evidence-based policies, and that evidence has to come from scientific data, from economic data, from population data, developmental data, even modeling, scenario construction, forex phenomena, technological penetration through sectors and countries, technology access regimes, technology denial regimes. So a whole gamut of issues have to be understood for a government even to set its own policies, and it just does not have the capacity within the four walls of any government office. It has to come from you and me, whether they like it or not. And also for us, an important, many of us, maybe not so much in social science, but in natural sciences, it's very common for us to overrate primary research and underrate or denigrate secondary tertiary research. What is secondary tertiary research? Somebody has cloned a gene, or somebody has identified a new cultivar of a crop, or somebody has done some survey on something. They generate primary data, empirical data, they publish their work, and even somebody is measuring the quality of water in Yamuna. It's a primary data. Somebody else is measuring, maybe somebody is measuring the same thing before Delhi, somebody is measuring after Delhi, somebody is measuring it at Prayagraj, and somebody is doing that for some other river. And none of them is bothered, other than for citation purpose, what does it mean along the length of the entire Yamuna? What does it mean as a part of the entire riverine system in the Indian Peninsula? What is the total, simple, understandable capsules, information capsules, including policy briefs for the people who have to take those decisions. And they need probably, dozens of such capsules every day across dozens of things that they probably are managing without knowing how they are managing. But the problem with the way our science is organized, the way our research is organized, and the reward structure, punishment structure, if you like, or the funding structure, even institutional structure is such that, at least in maybe not so much in social sciences or humanities, but certainly in natural sciences, if you do more than your own primary research, it is more likely you will be called a racketeer than a scientist. Why? And yet, it is these racketeers who eventually the government has to rely on for getting the distilled essence of somebody else's science. You may be a great scientist in your own lab or in your own area, but the government cannot understand your science, cannot read your paper, cannot make sense of what it means to them. Somebody else is doing it. All of us can do it, but we have chosen not to do it because of our own preoccupation with our own APIs, publication, citation, So we are all making choices, and as associations, it's very important for us to address this issue. All of you had a choice not to come to this hall, not to listen to me. All of you had a choice not to be active in JNUTA. All of you had a choice just to play to the gallery and get your timely promotions and increments and happily retire. So there are things that are popular to do, there are things that are rewarding to do, and there are things that ought to get done and nobody wants to do. This is not only true in unionism, it's also true in your science. There are things in science that ought to get done and nobody is doing, and you also don't want to do because it's not rewarding. And there are things which are very rewarding, but they may not reach anywhere. They reward you personally, but they don't actually make much difference in the ultimate sense in terms of society or country or world. How often have you thought about, if it takes an extra hour or two for me to spend this to do what ought to be done, because if I don't do it, nobody does it. And if nobody does it, it will be a tragedy. Because some of you have thought about it, at least for the purpose of collective issues of teachers, you are members of JNUTA. Because some of you are thinking about it in your own field, as in economics or foreign policy issues or defense policy issues, you come on television every day and NDTV or whatever and comment what government is doing right or wrong. You didn't have to do that. You chose to do it because you felt it is your duty beyond your own career to do this. This call of duty beyond a career is becoming increasingly important, and very soon these APIs might change. You may not be governed by publication citations anytime soon. You may not even get any grants only for publication citation anytime anymore. Grants तो वैसे भी खत्म हो रहे हैं. But जो बचे कुचे हैं after गोमूत्र गंगा जल and पंचगव्य and all that और योगा, जो बचे कुचे grants आपको मिलेंगे, उससे आपको ये पूछा जाएगा आप देश के लिए क्या कर रहे हो, राष्ट्र के लिए क्या कर रहे हो, इवन बेटर राष्ट्र के लिए क्या कर रहे हो. तो आपको ये हिम्मत जुटाना होगा. You have to be able to say from your field, from your vantage point in your discipline, how you can connect to that देश के लिए या राष्ट्र के लिए in a manner that idiot can understand. It is already on the horizon. It is going to hit you very soon. It is better, even if you don't have to do it as a call of duty, as a personal, higher order call of duty. You actually may be forced to do it because somebody is, very soon going to ask you to do it. They won't say, don't show me all this tissue paper. Show me what you've done to the country. So this transition is probably happening faster than we can comprehend, faster than we can cope with. And don't think this is only this government. Don't think this is only this party. Once a wild animal tastes blood, it will always want blood. Every government that comes after this government will want to do the same thing, maybe in a more sophisticated language, but it will want to do the same thing. So don't be surprised if the same thing comes from the future leaders. And this is happening in other countries as well, so not just in India. So we increasingly see that kind of strong, social connect and environmental connect and sustainability connect coming from all kinds of quarters. Even humanities people are talking. Of course, economics people are talking, who are so wedded to the market and stock and this and that. They are actually talking of more ground truths now than ever before. So, what does it mean? The country doesn't know how your work is important for policy. It doesn't care to know. You may have to actually make that connect, tell them that there is something happening here and it's important, and I think you need to know, you need to do something about it. So policy advocacy, you have to not only a scientist, you have to become an advocate, you have to become a civil society partner, you have to become a lawyer or a media person, all in one, sooner than you can imagine. And policy advocacy also requires interdisciplinary communication, and even language can become extremely important. Language not in the sense of the language you speak, but even the construct of the language in which you communicate. So for all linguistics people and language people, even other language people, vernacular language people, increasingly Hindi language might actually become very important for policy communication. If I go and talk to our ministers in English, he'll say, "बहुत बोल दिया अंग्रेजी, अब हिंदी में समझाओ." You have no option. He is there and you have to do it. So even language becomes important to communicate the connect between science and policy to the right people in the right way. So some of you language professionals may think about it. And of course, international relations I've been saying it all the time. Then you also build stakeholder consensus. Policies won't happen because you want them to happen. Policies happen because everybody wants them to happen. And that everybody includes not just a bureaucrat or a politician who will not change any policy unless it brings them votes. Government run in 5-yearly cycles. Nothing that happens beyond 5 years is of any interest to any government, barring a few very ideological targets which will be there. हमारे 5 साल है, हम अगले 50 साल के लिए फाउंडेशन लगाना है, वो अलग आइडियोलॉजिकल टारगेट होता है पार्टीज का. बट ऑन रूटीन डिसीजंस most governments do not want to touch anything that they cannot complete and claim credit for it within 5-year cycles. So you have to be able to communicate your 50-year science in what it can deliver in 5-yearly cycles, so that it makes sense to their electoral understanding. Social movements, electoral agendas, even residential welfare associations, environmental movements, climate movements, trade unions, all of them have an importance in setting a social agenda. At some point, this social agenda becomes a political agenda, and some party somewhere will introduce it in its manifesto, and hopefully someday it may even decide to actually address it when it comes to power. These things are very slow, painfully slow often, and if you start early in your career, you probably achieve something at that level by the time of your retirement. And I'm a standing example of that. So, stronger engagement between intelligentsia, governments and society, therefore, is of crucial significance here, because you have the burden of knowledge. Ignorance is always bliss. So, if you know that the world is in danger and something can be done and ought to be done, then you are the one who have to come and share it to all the other stakeholders and build that consensus. And of course, human and financial resources will always be important in any of this. And we as a human resource in an interdisciplinary university like this, doing an event like this is also an important step in that direction. Now, some of you may have seen this from the natural sciences or even in economics or environment, but this is a very interesting way to depict the state of the world. Okay, the traffic signals, red for danger, green for safe, yellow for warning, and concentric circles, these are planetary boundaries. Okay, boundaries means it's a way of depicting what is the tolerance limit of the planet to repair any damage caused to it by any of these various anthropogenic activities. Anthropogenic climate change, other miscellaneous things, stratosphere, ozone depletion, aerosols, ocean acidification, even mineral cycles, nitrogen, phosphorus, simple minerals which are used as fertilizers, as a part of the agriculture and food chain, they have now crossed planetary boundary into the red zone, whereas climate is here. We're still in the yellow zone and we are still making big noise. This has already crossed the ability of the planet to repair. Much of the damage will probably never be reversed, and we are not even talking about it. And land use, land change, genetic diversity has also thousands of species of biological diversity that have disappeared due to changes in nutrient cycles, due to changes in temperatures and other environmental issues, may never come back. They're gone forever. And if any of those species had an important role in the ecosystem, that link in the ecosystem is broken. If it is a part of a food chain is broken. So they have consequences for all of us, because environment gives us ecosystem services. Clean air is an ecosystem service. Drinkable water, bathable water, even water for boating is an ecosystem service. Fishing, water body supporting livelihood of fishermen, boatsmen is an ecosystem service. All these ecosystem services are finished. Our rivers, Sahibi River has become Nazafgarh Nala, right? So the entire ecosystem services of what used to be a river is now a sewage drain. And same is true with Shadra Nala. Many of our rivers have become nalas. All right. So from here I'll take you to the more specific things that we have done in relation to nitrogen. I'll try to move it quickly because I cannot tell you about all the things. We have addressed the problem of nutrient cycles, more specifically nitrogen, in this larger picture. Okay. Their nutrient cycles are important, though we work mainly on nitrogen, but they're also important: phosphorus, potassium, carbon, of course, you heard through the climate change people, and sulfur. There are only a dozen elements which are required for the entire life to exist on this planet. Maybe 14, 15, not more than that. Half a dozen of them are the macro elements required in larger quantity. Most others are required in very minute quantity. And these elements are constantly cycled between the biotic world and the abiotic world. The dead organisms decompose and some of it comes back into the atmosphere or water and supports the cycle. So these are called biogeochemical cycles. So the nitrogen biogeochemical cycle is broken. It has become a cascade. It is no longer a cycle. Nitrification, denitrification balance is broken. Nitrogen by itself constitutes 78% of the air we breathe, but the compounded form of nitrogen like ammonia or nitrous oxide or nitric oxide, nitrates in water, they are all reactive components, very reactive, very harmful. Even PM 2.5, which kills 1.6 million people every year according to WHO in India alone, more than 2.4 million people in South Asia. And worst 15 polluted cities in the world, 14 of them are in India, including Delhi. And the deaths due to PM 2.5 are among the largest causes of death. But PM 2.5 is not a magical particle of some unknown elements or a molecule of silica. It's actually the nitrogen compounds coated onto it from pollution that constitute the most harmful part of the PM 2.5 are all the nitrate particles, ammonia particles, either due to wet deposition or dry deposition. So if you can't breathe, think about nitrogen. So the natural cycles are broken. As fertilizers, they are important. One of the largest deliberate creation of reactive nitrogen that we do on this planet is to make fertilizers for food production. 100 years ago, before the invention of the Haber-Bosch process, which got 2 Nobel Prizes, we just used manure or bird dropping or even compost to grow, to get these minerals back to the plants. But once we identified a way of making it chemically, we just don't use this anymore. The green revolution and white revolution have gone in opposite directions. Livestock farmers have to buy grass. They don't have land to grow grass. Okay? And crop farmers have to buy even manure and urine. They don't keep cattle anymore. They have tractors. And this is a major problem because the waste of one is a resource for the other. And that third connecting industry doesn't exist. Maybe somebody should do this. We need a grey revolution to connect the green and white revolutions. There's a huge business opportunity there, huge academic opportunity there, huge technological opportunity there, and enough science has been done to trigger all these three. Some pollutants are nutrients in the wrong place. If the water turns green, it is because of algae. Why algae? Because too many nutrients. Then the water turns brown, brown algae. It turns red, red algae. So eutrophication of water bodies, including some coastal areas, is mostly due to biological growth beyond the normal, tolerable levels of that water, which is because too many of these nutrients are, feeding them, and so they are multiplying. So if you want blue water, stop releasing nutrients into water bodies. But we do it all the time, and which means when we treat water, we recover some of them, but they are pollutants. In reality, they are nutrients also, some of them. The tons of nitrogen and phosphorus which is recovered from the 35 sewage treatment plants all over Delhi is not being used as fertilizer. Government is willing to give it free. Either farmers don't know or they think urea is cheaper, whatever. But recycling is possible, it is available, given free, but no offtake. So there are serious problems there. So nitrogen inputs, they pollute air. Of course, they cause ammonia emission. Nitrous oxide is 300 times more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. The biggest communication disservice that IPCC has done in communicating climate change is that it has converted all the greenhouse gases into carbon dioxide equivalents. And so you think climate change is only about carbon. No. Initially people thought it's only carbon dioxide. Then they said methane is also there. Second most important greenhouse gas. But methane is also a carbon compound. Then they said, okay, both carbon, carbon. But the third most important, which is nitrous oxide, is the third most important greenhouse gas, and nobody talks about it. Nobody even measures it quite often. So ignorance is bliss. Again, sometimes science communication, in its necessity to simplify certain things, ends up miscommunicating. And at least IPCC has done that by converting all the greenhouse gases into carbon equivalents. Many scientists themselves don't know, and many government people working in environment ministry also don't know, that nitrous oxide is also a greenhouse gas, and it's also equally important. Though it is what is called short range climate forcer, it may not travel long distances, but it does affect in a very big way, and it is 300 times more powerful. So even small increase in nitrous oxide could be more dangerous than large increase in carbon dioxide. Of course, you also have dissolved nitrates, phosphates and sulfates that become a part of polluted water bodies. They cause adverse impacts on health, environment, livelihoods, ecosystem services, jobs, social relations, and urban environments are worst affected because of high consumption and low production of basic commodities. National assessments of nitrogen are important because they help domestic action and global negotiation. So at least now I'll confine mostly to nitrogen, though I don't mean that it's only important for nitrogen. Similar concepts will apply for other nutrients as well, and the global cycles issues also apply to other environmental anthropogenic abuses of the planet. So these are the 4 major nitrogen species coming from either fertilizers or manure or exhaust from either energy generation, electricity production, coal, diesel, petroleum burning, or water pollution through effluents, or nitrous oxide, NOx production through, that should be actually, this is NOx, and that is nitrous oxide. So if you think of it as a leaky pipeline, at least within the agriculture sector, similar thing you could think of other sectors. So you're putting in fertilizer because the largest amount of anthropogenically deliberately manufactured reactive nitrogen is fertilizer. And the largest use of it is in food production or feed production or fiber production. Food, feed and fiber together take a lot of fertilizer. But all of it does not get taken by the crop. Only part of it is harvested by the crop and some of it goes into human food, some of it goes into animal feed, but a lot of it also leaks into water systems or into air systems. And then animals also lose part of it through manure, urine or through belching. And then what is eventually out is the output through animal production or output through plant production. But what is leaked out is causing all these biodiversity impacts, climate change impact, red tides and brown tides and fish kills, etc. in different parts of the world. So this is the cascade, how a cycle became a cascade, which also shows non-agricultural contributions like industry and fertilizer manufacture. These are the images of global maps obtained through satellites, looking at the NOx concentration at the top, the nitrous oxide concentration in the middle, and the ammonia concentration in the bottom. These are the 3 major nitrogenous air pollutants. Okay? And you can see the darker the color, all traffic light colors, the more dangerous the concentration and therefore a problem. So India is one of the global hotspots for nitrous oxide. It is a major global hotspot for NOx, nitrous oxide, and also for ammonia, especially the northwest Green Revolution belt. In fact, we are polluting other neighboring countries who have nothing to do with what they are facing. Nepal, Bhutan is getting a lot of nitrogenous pollution from India for no fault of theirs. We should be lucky that they are not shouting. They can, under the UN system, they can make India answerable for this and even pay for this. Just like we are asking America to pay carbon financing, Nepal can and Bhutan and Maldives can ask us to pay for theirs. Dada banna hai, to ye bhi banna hai. These are recent EDGAR satellite maps of these 3 in the Indian subcontinent. For more recent data, between 1970 and 2015, as you can see, the colors have become more intense and more spread in more regions for NOx, for ammonia and for nitrous oxide between 70 to 2015. So there are a few gaps areas, now they are all covered. and this is completely taken over. And the unfortunate part is, and this is a lesson for many right behind our population to escape accountability for environment. Because anything you convert by a billion will be insignificant in the world. Carbon emission per capita insignificant. Totals don't matter. But in nitrogen, it is no longer the case. Our per capita NOx emission is also higher than world average. So there are areas of pollution where we are losing the option of using per capita argument to evade action. Probably happening in other areas as well. I don't know. But this is because this is a huge diplomatic weapon that India uses. Anything India is asked in the UN, they'll say, oh, we have a lot of population, in per capita terms, it's nothing. But you can't do that anymore and you can't get away. All right? Among all the major pollutants that cause various effects, both in environment, personal health, etc., and climate change, if you see, these are CPCB figures. NOx covers all the impacts, whereas carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, SOx, they only cover a few things. But this covers all the things. And that's the importance of nitrogen even in air pollution terms. And those are the data on the WHO data on health impacts of air pollution. Much of it is due to nitrogen. This was the 1.6 million data I was telling you about. This is WHO data. The darker the color, the bigger the damage. So we are the world's biggest killer zone for pollution-induced deaths. And that is the asthma cases among children. And as you can see, India is among the most affected nations in the world. This is the water pollution, dissolved nitrates, phosphates, everything. All the red zones, as you can see in different parts of the world. You can see in India, dissolved inorganic nitrogenous compounds and dissolved organic nitrogenous compounds, both are quite significant. And this is from the UNEP Global Partnership on Nutrient Management, where I've been involved in their steering committee. So some of these nutrients from human activities, when they eventually go down into waste, and this waste goes into drains, and drains goes into rivers, and rivers go into sea, they end up, sea becomes a sink for all that comes from everywhere. So eutrophication of the sea is a global problem. And because seas are shared and even some rivers are shared, intergovernmental cooperation becomes an important issue in addressing them. You have no choice of saying that I will do nothing. This is more specifically on agriculture. Maybe I can talk about it later at some point. But this just to give you a snapshot, as the food production has increased and area used for food production has roughly remained the same, fertilizer consumption has also increased. Half of the world would not have existed today if we had not used the fertilizer as an important source of nitrogen. This is where the global population is. So you can see the population growth, fertilizer growth as they've grown together. Whereas the yield due to input of nitrogen has been saturated. So the yield response to fertilizer input has saturated, which means you are increasingly governed by law of diminishing returns. The more fertilizer you add, the less output you get. Even in green revolution areas of Punjab and Haryana and UP, they are finding that they dump more and more fertilizer, but they don't get the same yield anymore. So the dream of green revolution is now beginning to be challenged. Then there are, of course, other complex interplays, especially for people from other fields, between food production, trade, biodiversity, climate change, which also then bring all those other disciplines in understanding and evaluating them. This is a very recent, this year's paper from one of our colleagues, which talks about how food and feed trade has greatly impacted global land and nitrogen use efficiencies in the last 50 odd years. And of course, we know it very well after Ukraine, how the world is impacted because of fertilizer trade and food trade and wheat trade. Agriculture and climate change affect each other. Many times you think agriculture is a victim of climate change, but agriculture also contributes to climate change when methane is lost from farm animals, or when ammonia or nitrous oxide are lost from fertilizers. in the major parts of the world, these are major regions, and this is South Asia, and this is Europe, and North America. Virtually in all parts of the world, the green part is the soil from where nitrous oxide is emitted. So within each of the bars, green bar is the waste. That means nitrous oxide is the major source of, agricultural soil is the major source of nitrous oxide emission in every region of the world. That's why it is a global problem. And fertilizer consumption per unit area is also very high in different parts of the world, including in India. Africa is the only region which is actually deficient in fertilizer. So their food security partly is because of lack of access to fertilizer or manure. Now, if you are a vegetarian, out of all the amount of fertilizer you add in nitrogen terms, 14% reaches your dinner table. If you are a non-vegetarian, there are so many leakages across the system that only 4% reaches your dinner table. We use in the International Nitrogen Initiative these images to explain to people what you can do individually as a citizen towards sustainable nitrogen management. Eat less meat. We promote a concept called Demetarianism, which is reducing the meat consumption by half. It may not apply to India so much, but in many Western countries, the total amount of meat a person consumes in a day is twice what is nutritionally considered the limit of healthy human consumption. So actually, they eat double the amount of meat that they should have eaten. So if they simply bring it back to their normal healthy level, half of the nitrogen that goes into meat in the world is saved, and that saves livestock, that saves feed, that saves fertilizer, that saves all of us. And in all the INI conferences, we insist that 50% meat is replaced with vegetables. This is the Indian data from Central Rice Research Institute over 40 years. They have shown that as the fertilizer consumption increased to increase yield, the partial factor productivity of nitrogen, that means the proportion of nitrogen contribution to the yield, has decreased. It has now become a law of diminishing returns. In fact, even agricultural scientists, many of them don't know that methane ceased to be the second most important greenhouse gas 20 years ago. It is actually nitrous oxide. Methane is going like this, nitrous oxide is going like this. So what are we doing about it? The good thing is we've learnt our lessons. In my generation, when I came back to join Delhi, we got together with many nitrogen scientists working in different parts of the nitrogen cycle, some on water pollution, some on air pollution, some on agriculture, some transport, etc. We said there is a looming problem. 20 years ago, nobody knew this, even we did not know. We are seeing very early signs in the literature. We said, gentlemen, what lessons have we learned from carbon or from negotiating climate change issues through carbon? We have learned that global carbon assessment requires input from many sectors and many disciplines. They have to work together. And when the IPCC made its first report to say that developing countries' methane production is as high as the carbon dioxide production from developed countries, that means industrialized and non-industrialized have roughly comparable contribution. We were shocked by the data. We had no data of our own. They were extrapolating European and American data. They have big cows, belching heavily, and we used that. When they used the data to make these estimates, we were shocked. But we took time to generate our own data, 20-30 years. We had no mechanism to bring all these interdisciplinary people together. Eventually, we proved the data wrong. They had to change those values and come up with different estimates, and that gave us some breather. Having learned this lesson in the carbon, are we better prepared for nitrogen? This was the question we were asking ourselves 20 years ago. And then we initiated a series of activities informally, and this is just a timeline of events, Indian events in the bottom and global events at the top. As you can see, we were almost as active at par with the global powers. The International Nitrogen Initiative started in 2003 We started in 2004. That's the only difference. Indian Nitrogen Group started in 2004, officially declared in 2006, and major events including South Asian. We are also the regional leader for South Asian Nitrogen Group, and now the world considers India to be one of the global leaders in nitrogen because of all this. And we produced all these various important documents. Not all of them are pure research articles. This is a book that's a policy brief for SCOPE, IGBP, for INSA. This is a policy brief for National Academy of Agriculture Science, and that's of course a journal, special issue on nitrogen on the 75th anniversary of the journal. But all this was not primary science. All this was not bringing us any awards, rewards, APIs. We were doing it because we thought it was necessary to do. More recently, in 2017, we actually aggregated all the information to bring out a single compendium called Indian Nitrogen Assessment from all the sectoral assessments. Now, we are also about to complete the South Asian assessment, and we are an important part of the Global Nitrogen Assessment, which I am also co-editing with my Western colleagues. This is just to give an idea of the range of topics we have covered even in the National Nitrogen Assessment. It included, some economics estimates, some physical atmospheric science stuff, some fertilizer stuff, some traffic, energy, all kinds of things, even policy scenarios. This is not very visible, but let me not go into this. Waste is becoming a major source of nitrous oxide emission, growing faster than nitrous oxide. Yeah, we'll finish in 5 minutes. Yeah, yeah.
We need about 20 minutes of discussion.
Yeah, of course. So when you do residue burning, you not only create pollution but also use a lot of nutrients in those residues. These are all the important amount: 80% of nitrogen, 100% carbon, 25% phosphorus, sulfur. You lose all the important nutrients. So when the Indian Nitrogen Assessment was done, we showcased it in the World Environment Day in 2018 in a major event of Government of India in Delhi. And with that, we took it to the United Nations. We managed to convince Dr. Harshvardhan at that point that India was reacting to following a global leader on carbon, and we didn't have data then. Now we have data before anybody asked us to collect. Can we reverse the table? Can we go to the UN and lead the world campaign on nitrogen? Because we have our back covered, we have our data in place, and nobody can fool us with our data. They actually did it. You only have to trust a Vishwaguru to do it. And then came the first UN resolution on sustainable nitrogen management, passed in 4th UN Environment Assembly in February 2019. And now this was followed by another resolution piloted by Sri Lankan government to, on how to implement that resolution, some of the roadmaps and some details, and more resolution will follow as we go along. So but in order to address this, to implement this, you have to address agriculture, you have to address transport, industry, waste recycling, as well as societal consumption patterns. And one can go into details of how they can be done in each case. And now we see that there is a whole global policy arena developing around nitrogen. Multiple international bodies, international protocols are now beginning, which already had some nitrogen as a part of their agenda, but they were not addressing it prominently. So now we are asking for an inter-convention coordination mechanism where biodiversity, nitrogen, CBD will do something, atmosphere, Montreal Protocol will do something, trade and economy, WTO will do something, climate change, UNFCCC. So we, through the International Nitrogen Initiative, are demanding that all these governmental mechanisms should coordinate their role on nitrogen because it is already crossing the planetary boundaries. We also identified in the last INI conference held in Berlin online last year, nitrogen linked to each of the 17 sustainable development goals. We actually described how nitrogen links to each of the 17, and we gave a call that halving the nitrogen waste is possible and feasible if you take the right choices at the right time and implement in the right way. And this is now a major intergovernmental point of discussion. So from lab science to secondary science to policy briefs to conference declarations, Delhi Declaration in 2010, Berlin Declaration 2017, Kampala Declaration 2013, all of them feeding into UN and eventually coming up with a intergovernmental system. In our own field, we use this to also identify which crop we should work on as a biologist. We work on rice because that is the biggest consumer of fertilizer. One small thing I want to point out, if you look at the different parts of the world and what crops they grow, and this is a lesson from Green Revolution. You can't see the color. The legumes, which are natural fixers of nitrogen, whether oilseed legumes or pulses or other feed legumes, have declined over the last 50 years. This is a very big contribution to unsustainability of nitrogen. Fertilizer increased, natural legume nitrogen fixation decreased. So one of the things we could do to halve the nitrogen waste is simply bring back crop rotation. Punjab problem will be solved, many other problems will be solved. Telangana is now right next to Punjab in fighting for MSP on rice, because the improved irrigation, everybody shifted from legumes to rice and they want government to buy. Government does not want to buy. Mind you, we all agree that crop diversification is necessary, but crop diversification will not happen, it's a political reality, without procurement diversification. Government procures only rice, wheat and sugar, nothing else. Farmer only want to produce rice, wheat and sugar, nothing else, because there is a guaranteed procurement and a guaranteed price. So rather than denying them MSP for rice and wheat, you should actually procure dals at MSP. That will shift their cultivation pattern and that will also address this problem. So these are important policy inputs that we are able to bring through this. Of course, we sometimes have to fight pseudoscience like the zero budget natural farming. The whole of the UN was convinced that the Indian slogan of zero budget natural farming, Vedic farming was the ultimate solution. I had to write an article in United Nations Perspectives to say that this is pseudoscience. Now they have toned down that. And we are also looking at nutrient recovery from wastewater in Delhi sewage treatment plants. Some of our environment postdocs are working on it, and we hope to be able to recycle those nutrients back into at least horticulture, if not edible crops, so that we can reduce that much of nitrogen pollution in Delhi. And these are also some of the policy reports we have given to the Government of India and to South Asian Cooperative Environment Program, the regional intergovernmental body of SARC, and many others. All of these are thankless jobs for which you get no promotion, no reward, no increment. We also write now policy papers in international journals for the benefit of those who are actually involved in policy research. We have to edit special issues of journals to keep the momentum of scientific input in this field. As we speak, there are at least half a dozen journals, 3 of which I am involved in providing a dedicated publishing space for articles on all aspects of reactive nitrogen, not only in plant science but also in other journals. So in a nutshell, that's the Indian journey towards global nitrogen leadership. I can stop here. I'll leave the slide for you to read and we can go for discussion. Thank you.